Okay, so when you're lifting weights, there's an important concept that you need to understand, which is the difference between what we call a compound exercise and an isolation exercise. Now, in a nutshell, a compound exercise will use more than one joint. And I'll give you a great example. If I'm pushing forwards, okay, we've got the elbow joint is moving, that's flexing, and then also the shoulder as well. So we've got the two movements. Whereas if I was doing just a bicep curl, the only movement is happening at my elbow. So the bicep curl would be an isolation, and the compound is when we're pushing like that. Now, it goes the same with squats. If you're doing a squat, we've got knee joint and hip joint movement in there. But if it was just kicking out your knee, you can't see the demonstration I just gave there, but just extending the leg like that, that would be an isolation. So that's all very good. You know some names of some different movements now. The reason that's important is because when you're doing weights, you're almost always going to be lifting a lighter weight when you're doing an isolation movement than you would with a compound, because the compound movements tend to be our most powerful movements, all right? Things like push-ups or dumbbell presses or a single arm row, you're going to be able to lift a lot more than you would if you were doing an overhead tricep extension or just a bicep curl, or even any of the straight arm shoulder movements like this with the lateral raise, for example. You're going to need a lighter weight on most of the isolation exercises, and you can potentially lift heavier on your compound movements. However, it's not a simple rule that always applies, okay? What you need to understand and need to apply is you need to be working at the right repetition range for a given exercise and with the right weight. So if you're doing lateral raises and you're trying to do lateral raise with the same weight that you're doing a row or a dumbbell press, you're going to find you're not going to be able to do anywhere near as many reps, all right? So this is an example of when you might use a lighter weight for it. So factor that was in. You're trying to keep your repetition ranges within a certain area, so between 10 and 20 ideally. And then the other important thing is, as you increase your repetitions over time, as you get stronger or you build your endurance, when you get to around the 20 mark, I declare that too easy, okay? So you're going to increase the weight. Let it be known that when you increase the weight, automatically you won't be able to do as many repetitions. So you have to go back down to nearer the 10 range or whatever it is. The weight will dictate what you're capable of doing, therefore the number of reps, all right? But, so understand the difference between isolation and compound. Your compound movements are always going to be more powerful, so you're likely to be able to lift more weight with that. Whereas with your isolation exercises, you're probably going to need a lighter weight. There's no real way to answer what you're going to need. I mean, if you're on the light end of the spectrum with scales, I said no, I'm not even going to say that. On the if you're working sort of somewhere between 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4, you might find that on your isolation exercises, you're actually using about 50% of what you're doing with your compounds. But in reality, every exercise probably going to need a different weight, really. So it's up to you to try and establish what weights work for you, but don't be put off if you're trying an isolation exercise and you're like, it's really hard, I can't do many. You're not meant to do many with it. You're meant to be using a lighter weight. Okay, so make sure you pay attention to that and remember it going forward.